At 81, Mick Jagger still struts across stages with the fire of a man half his age. But behind the fame, the fortune, and the frontman persona lies a more intimate story. A story of 6 women who shaped his heart, his music, and his evolution as a man. From fiery affairs to lifelong bonds, from heartbreaks that nearly broke him to loves that quietly healed him, these women were more than headlines. They were the rhythm beneath his swagger. So what happens when a rock god looks back at the loves that made him human? This is that story. Bianca Jagger, the first true love. In 1971, under the Mediterranean sun of Saint-Tropez, Mick Jagger married Bianca Perez Mora Macias in a ceremony that stopped the world. She arrived in a white Yves Saint Laurent suite, no veil, just power. And from that moment, Bianca wasn't just Mick's wife. She was a symbol of elegance, of rebellion, of a new kind of woman stepping into rock's wild orbit. Bianca grounded Mick during the chaos of the early Stones years, when the world was spinning fast. Drugs, groupies, tours, riots. She gave structure to his storm. Friends say she brought intellect and poise to a man surrounded by frenzy. She introduced him to art collectors, world leaders, and cultural circles far beyond the music scene. For a while, she was his anchor. But behind the flashbulbs, things weren't always stable. Mick's infidelity and the relentless touring strained their bond. Bianca famously said, "My marriage ended on my wedding day," a cutting line that spoke volumes. By 1978, their separation became public. The divorce wasn't a scandal. It was a cultural turning point, a chapter closed. Yet there's no bitterness in Mick's reflection. He's often said, "Bianca taught me so much about the world." And even decades later, he speaks of her with something close to reverence. Because Bianca wasn't just a romantic partner, she helped shape the man he became. After their split, Bianca transformed. She stepped away from the red carpets and into global activism. From Nicaragua to Kosovo, she became a fierce voice for human rights. And Mick watched, proudly, from a distance. Today, their love feels like a Polaroid from another era. Bold, beautiful, a little blurry around the edges. But it mattered. Bianca was the first woman to show Mick that love could be powerful, political, and deeply personal. Their story wasn't just about affection. It was about evolution. And for Mick, it was the beginning of understanding that love doesn't just decorate your life. It redefines it. Jerry Hall, the iconic onstage partner. When Mick Jagger met Jerry Hall in 1977 on the set of a Fleetwood Mac tour in Australia, it felt like a rock opera waiting to happen. Tall, Texan, and fearless, Jerry wasn't just another model. She had presence. She matched Mick's energy, mirrored his confidence, and for the first time in a long time, he met someone who could walk beside him, not behind him. Their romance was wild, unapologetic, and stretched across 17 unforgettable years. Through the neon-drenched 80s, Jerry and Mick became a kind of rock royalty, glamorous, unpredictable, and endlessly photographed. But their connection ran deeper than fashion spreads and stadium lights. Jerry gave Mick 4 children and something even rarer: stability. Off stage, she anchored his chaos. When the headlines screamed about scandals or the band was burning out, Jerry held her ground. She said that life with Mick was a storm, but she stayed because he had a soft side no one else ever saw. He, in turn, credited her with teaching him how to be a real father, present, protective, involved. Yet, even the strongest stage sets eventually come down. In the late 90s, after revelations of another affair, Jerry left. Their split wasn't just personal, it was public and painful. But time softened the scars. They became co-parents, then friends, and today Mick often speaks with deep respect for her. "She taught me how to show up," he once said. Their story was a performance of extremes: passion and heartbreak, love and betrayal, laughter and loss. But what stayed beyond the drama was the bond. Jerry was the woman who knew both Mick Jagger, the icon, and Mick Jagger, the man, and loved both. Luciana Gimenez, the Brazilian chapter. In 1998, Mick Jagger's name was once again in headlines, but this time it wasn't a tour or a scandal. It was a surprise pregnancy. The woman was Luciana Gimenez, a stunning Brazilian TV host and former model. Their romance was brief, but it left an impact that's lasted a lifetime. Their son, Lucas. At the time, the world assumed it would be just another celebrity paternity case. But Mick did something unexpected. He stepped up. He embraced fatherhood in a way many hadn't seen from him before. Openly, emotionally, and fully present. Luciana later said, "He didn't just support us, he cared." The two never became a couple in the traditional sense, but their relationship was built on respect. Luciana praised Mick for being there, for showing up, calling, and nurturing a bond with his son. And Mick, for his part, was fiercely protective of Lucas. Fatherhood, once a footnote in his legend, became a centerpiece. Luciana represented a turning point. She didn't try to change Mick. She showed him that love could exist without control or chaos, just trust, just commitment. It was a quieter kind of affection, but it shaped him deeply. In Lucas, Mick found a new kind of legacy. Their story isn't dramatic or cinematic. It's real. And maybe that's why it means so much. Not every love changes your life. Some loves help you become who you're supposed to be. That was Luciana. Melanie Hamrick, the present-day love. By the time Mick Jagger met Melanie Hamrick in 2014, the world assumed his love stories were behind him. But then came a new chapter, one no one saw coming. A classically trained ballet dancer decades his junior, Melanie brought grace, privacy, and something unexpected into Mick's life: peace. In 2016, they welcomed their son Devereaux. Mick was 73, and suddenly, the man once known for his swagger and speed was cradling a newborn, soft-spoken and smiling. He called Melanie his muse and my peace, words no one expected from rock's eternal bad boy. What set Melanie apart wasn't just their age gap, it was the absence of spectacle. No tabloid wars, no public fights, just quiet companionship. Mick fiercely protects her from the chaos that once defined his relationships. He rarely speaks about their private life, but when he does, his tone changes. Tender, proud, deeply grounded. Melanie doesn't try to compete with his past. She stands calmly in the present. She's seen backstage, not on stage. And yet, many close to him say she's the first woman who truly made him slow down, not in life, but in heart. Now, at 81, Mick credits Melanie with showing him that love isn't just fireworks, it's foundation. It's waking up and choosing peace over drama. And it's why he says, "I've never been more emotionally connected than I am now." Their love may not be a headline, but it might be his truest encore. Nancy Sinatra, the early flame. Before the fame exploded, before the Stones became legends, there was Nancy Sinatra, a name that whispered through the corridors of early rock gossip. Their romance, brief and mostly private, happened in the early 60s, but its impact lingered far longer. Nancy was already a star when Mick was just stepping into the spotlight. She brought charm, laughter, and a surprising sense of calm. For a moment, Mick wasn't the frontman of rebellion, he was just a young man in love. She made him laugh when the pressure felt crushing. In one rare interview, Nancy hinted at their break. "I left because someone else made me laugh." It wasn't bitter, just nostalgic, like flipping through an old photo album. Still, Mick never forgot her. Years later, he admitted, "I never really got over that one." Some say Nancy inspired the emotional depth in early Stones songs, the longing in As Tears Go By, the sweetness in Lady Jane, all laced with a quiet ache. She may not have shaped his public image, but she left fingerprints on his heart. That first heartbreak cuts the deepest. And for Mick, Nancy was the one that slipped through his fingers before the world truly knew his name. It wasn't loud, it wasn't messy, but it mattered. Marianne Faithfull. The Artistic Bond. In 1966, Marianne Faithfull entered Mick Jagger's world like a spark to gasoline. Blonde, bohemian, and brilliant, she wasn't just another pretty face. She was a poet, a singer, and an artist with a fire of her own. Their relationship was electric, full of passion and pain, creativity and collapse. Marianne wasn't afraid of Mick's darkness. She danced with it. They shared everything: songs, scripts, silence, and self-destruction. During their most intense years, she was more than a lover. She was a mirror. She co-wrote lyrics, challenged his ideas, and inspired some of the Stones' most haunting music. It's widely believed that Wild Horses and She's a Rainbow were shaped by their connection. But with brilliance came turbulence. They fell hard, and they fell apart. The late 60s were marked by drug use, arrests, and hospitalizations. Marianne nearly lost everything, including herself. And Mick? He watched her unravel, unable to stop it. He once said their love left marks I still feel. After they split in 1970, Marianne spiraled, but she eventually returned, reinvented, and more powerful than ever. Her solo album, Broken English, stunned critics and Mick. Decades later, he called her the strongest woman I've ever known. They never rekindled the romance, but the respect endured. Their love wasn't about fairy tales, it was about art, survival, and truth. Marianne cracked Mick's surface and showed him what it meant to be vulnerable. In loving her, he became more human and more honest in his music. Their chapter ended in heartbreak, but the echoes are still in his songs. Beyond red carpets, what love meant to Mick. For Mick Jagger, love was never a one-size-fits-all story. It wasn't just about flowers or rings, it was about change. Each woman he loved became a teacher, a muse, a mirror. And while most people look for comfort in relationships, Mick chased transformation. With Bianca, he learned about elegance and ambition. Jerry taught him about responsibility. Luciana introduced him to patient co-parenting. Melanie gave him serenity. Marianne showed him how love could bleed and still be beautiful. "Every woman I loved," Mick once said, "helped build the man I became." Over time, his definition of love shifted. At first, it was about spark, sudden, wild, all-consuming. But later, it became about depth, connection, peace. He stopped looking for a high and started seeking harmony. That's why in interviews today, he calls Melanie a different kind of love, quieter but stronger. For Mick, Love wasn't about control or perfection. It was about movement, becoming better, not just happier. And if you listen closely, you'll hear it in the music. The tone changed. The words softened. The man evolved. The evolution of intimacy. Mick Jagger's early relationships were like his concerts, loud, fast, unforgettable. But age has a way of softening even the hardest chords. What started as infatuation in his youth slowly transformed into something gentler, more intentional. In the 60s and 70s, love was intense. He chased it like a song, craving the chaos, the drama, the burn. But passion, without peace, eventually fades. As the years passed and fatherhood became more central, Mick began seeing love not as possession, but as partnership. With Jerry Hall, he learned how to coexist. With Luciana, how to co-parent. And with Melanie, how to simply be present. He said, a real relationship is a partnership. That's what I've come to understand. It's a far cry from the swaggering frontman of the 70s, but it's real. Love in Mick's life aged like his voice, less raw, more refined. And while the fire never went out, it now burns slower, steadier. That's growth. That's grace. Songs inspired by these loves. If Mick's heart had a soundtrack, it would be made of whispers, screams, and confessions. His women weren't just companions, they were muses. And from Bianca to Melanie, their fingerprints are all over his lyrics. Brown Sugar and Wild Horses emerged during his time with Bianca. The former a controversy, the latter a quiet heartbreak. With Marianne, songs like She's a Rainbow and Moonlight Mile painted a portrait of inner beauty and outer chaos. Each track carried a piece of her soul. With Melanie, it's different. There are no chart-topping hits yet, but behind the scenes, he's written unreleased tracks just for her. A new kind of song, personal, private, maybe even sacred. He once said, "Not every song's meant for the stage, some are meant for silence." In every lyric, there's a woman. In every chorus, a memory. Love for Mick wasn't just lived, it was sung. And those songs, they still play, reminding us that every affair, every heartbreak, had a purpose. They weren't just flings, they were verses. Children, emotional legacies of love. Mick Jagger has 8 children, but it's not the number that stands out. It's the way he speaks about them. Fatherhood didn't just change his schedule, it changed his soul. With Jerry Hall, he raised a tribe, fashion icons, artists, thinkers. With Luciana, he raised Lucas and formed a respectful, caring, co-parenting bond. And then came Devereaux with Melanie, born when Mick was 73. That birth wasn't just surprising, it was transformative. "This is the chapter I never thought I'd get," he said. "What's clear is this: Mick's greatest loves became mothers of his greatest legacy. And those kids? They're not just his blood, they're his balance." The swagger gave way to softness. The performer became a provider. In the end, love wasn't just about who stood beside him. It was about who looked up to him. And in their eyes, he found a version of himself he'd never seen before. A father, a protector, a man who finally understood what love really meant. Love, loss, and reinvention. Mick Jagger never stayed still, not on stage, not in love. His life was movement, momentum, spectacle. But behind the flashing lights and roaring crowds, his real transformation came through heartbreak. With every breakup, he didn't just move on. He reflected, he reshaped, he evolved. His divorce from Bianca in 1978 wasn't just a legal document. It was a symbolic end to the most dazzling, dangerous part of his youth. They were the power couple of the 70s. She, sharp and politically fierce, Bimei, magnetic and mythic. But the tension, the betrayals, the disconnection, it all caught up. Mick later admitted, "Losing her made me look at myself differently." That one loss peeled away his public armor and exposed something raw, something vulnerable. For a man built on image, that was a reckoning. Then came the fallout with Jerry Hall, the woman who gave him not just children, but a kind of emotional home. For nearly 2 decades, she'd been by his side, through drug scandals, rehab stints, world tours, and late-night madness. But infidelity snapped the final thread. Jerry had enough. And when she walked away, she didn't slam the door. She closed it gently and left a note. "Grow up." And somehow, he did. The man who once bragged about excess now learned to dial it down. He became a better father, a more careful partner. Their post-split journey was awkward, but eventually they found respect. They co-parented. They shared moments. They laughed again. And that evolution was crucial, not for the media, but for Mick himself. He began to value the quiet work of repair. Even his shorter, more chaotic romances left deep impressions. With Luciana, he faced the responsibility of fatherhood later in life. With Marianne, he confronted his own destructiveness, mirrored in her own. These weren't just flings. They were confrontations with his soul. He once said, "Each woman I've loved has taught me how to become more human." That's not something the young Mick Jagger would have said. But pain teaches what fame never can. Reinvention isn't just about changing your wardrobe or your sound. It's about breaking down and rebuilding the inner scaffolding, piece by piece, scar by scar. What makes his journey remarkable isn't how many times he fell in love. It's how many times he was willing to let love change him. And in those quiet moments after the spotlight fades, that's where the real Mick began to emerge. Love on tour, balancing fame and family. In the early days, love followed the tour bus. Bianca joined Mick on the road in the 70s, sharp, stylish, and unshaken by the backstage madness. She wasn't just arm candy, she was resilience in heels, navigating the whirlwind of groupies, guitars, and global chaos. Jerry did the same in the 80s, bringing their children along, turning chaotic hotel rooms into makeshift homes. Their love lives became part of the tour, woven into the rhythm of the Stones' thunderous decades. But fame, for all its glamour, has a cost. The constant travel, the flashing cameras, the noise. It doesn't leave much room for intimacy. There's always another show, another city, another late night. And slowly, Mick started to see the cracks, the exhaustion, the distance, the loneliness that creeps in when thousands are screaming your name. But the person you love feels a million miles away. He once said, "You can't have it all at once. Fame and peace don't live in the same house." And maybe that's the most honest thing he's ever admitted. With time, he began to protect what mattered. With Luciana, there were no world tours, just quiet fatherhood. With Melanie, there were no red carpets, just long walks, shared dinners, whispered jokes. Melanie Hamrick, for instance, rarely appears in public with him, not because there's shame, but because there's something sacred in silence. After decades of living in a spotlight, Mick learned a truth most never do. Love doesn't need to be loud to be real. Sometimes the strongest relationships are the quietest, the ones that don't scream for attention, but simply exist, steadily, day after day. In his 70s and now 80s, Mick started making decisions he never would have made in his 20s. He skipped glitzy events, turned off the cameras, stayed home instead of chasing the after-party. He began to prioritize birthdays over concerts, dinners over deadlines. Love became a different kind of stage, one where presence mattered more than performance. There's something profound about watching a man like Mick Jagger, who once lived on adrenaline, choose stillness. Because in the end, the road never really ends. But love? That's the destination. And for the first time in his life, Mick chose to arrive, not just pass through. Media versus reality. From the start, Mick Jagger's love life was a tabloid magnet. Paparazzi followed every kiss, every quarrel. Headlines made myths. But the truth? It was often quieter and far more complex. The media loved to paint his romances in broad strokes. Bianca, the ice queen, Jerry, the loyal mother, Luciana, the scandal, Melanie, the mystery. But those were snapshots, not stories. In reality, Mick learned to set emotional boundaries. Not everything had to be shared. Not every moment was for show. With Melanie, he's been especially private. And yet, in the rare times he opens up, the emotion is raw. He's said, "There are things I won't explain, not because I'm hiding them, but because they belong to us." That's a man who's learned the cost of overexposure. Even with his kids, Mick now chooses what the world sees. Photos are rare. Interviews, even rarer. He knows the power of mystery. But more than that, he understands the power of protecting what matters. The difference between Mick the legend and Mick the lover is this. The former needs an audience. The latter doesn't. And in that quiet, private space, he's found something even louder than fame: authentic connection. These 6 women didn't just love Mick Jagger. They challenged him, changed him, and helped him grow. At 81, he doesn't just remember them, he honors them. In every lyric, every look, every quiet moment, their impact lingers. Because in the end, his greatest legacy isn't just music, it's the love behind it.